I was going to say, we can't hear you, Boris.
Gotta go in and out again.
What happens to the music?
Well, we started.
Okay. Can you
Boris,
guys hear me now?
Boris killed the
Does it
bot.
work?
Yes. Hello, Boris.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
Hello,
sorry,
can
I'm
hear
2
you.
minutes late.
Boris, you need to change whatever you're doing in your first step since you always have to come back a second time.
I mean, I start the meeting, right? So I push the start button, and then I automatically join the stage, and nobody can hear me. And then I leave and come back in, and it works. I don't know, for some reason, like, when I start it doesn't work.
Right.
Bizarre.
Yeah. Okay, so the agenda for today, at least the proposed agenda, is first of all, talk about the HIP that was proposed by Keith, is it? Who or Gateholder?
Yes.
Who wrote that?
I
Keith,
did.
yeah, okay. About the indoor radio priority. 2, I can present, or it looks like at least some of you have gone through the doc already, and we can discuss the next iteration of the carrier boosting HIP, and then check in on progress with the Oracle Hex boosting and potentially committed coverage, which was on Armand's plate, but it doesn't look like he's here today. So that's what I'm thinking we should do, but let me know if there's anything else that any of you have that you want to throw in on the agenda before we dive in.
I think we were good to go.
Okay, cool. Then let's start with the somebody has raised their hand. Waved. One
I
sec.
think that's just a wave.
Okay, cool. So the indoor radio priority HIP. I mean, I don't know if there's a lot to discuss. I saw there's been a lot of discussion in Discord before. I personally think it makes sense. So I am in support of this HIP. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, let's publish it and let's vote on it. Anybody has any dissent or suggestions about it or anything?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Just on timing, should we wait for the VE mobile voting to vote on it?
So I think we should just like pile it in. I'll make it my job to basically add it to the pipeline of HIPs we want voted. The mapper's HIP is still in that pile, and then I'll leave it up to the foundation to sequence it because we don't directly control like this sequence ourselves. There's the position in the foundation currently is that there are important HIPs that need to be passed, completed, or socialized related to the Solana migration, which take priority. So I think that what we should do is just kind of like add it to the pipeline and voice our joint support for passing it as the mobile POC working group, and then let the foundation drive the the proper process for getting it published, getting it voted, etc.
I guess of course it won't really matter anyway until HIP 74 is implemented. Is that accurate? HIP 74 being obstruction data kind of rewards framework.
It was my understanding when I was asked, and it was just basically solving the math problem of going first and that's why the indoors were not being calculated correctly. Because and again, I think it's because they're not in the obstruction data. They don't have a value, so they weren't counted. But if they go first, then their small little circle of influence coverage gets calculated correctly. So I think you're correct. It needs to go with HIP 74's implementation.
Yeah, I guess with that being said, then, Boris, is there any idea on implementation of HIP 74? I know it's predicated on the migration.
So I think that like most of the work has been done, really. The question is like it's tied to migration, basically. I don't think there's a ton of work that needs to be done on the mobile rewards oracle, which is the entity that does a lot of the calculations related to the hexes. So I think we're just like waiting for migration to be complete, and then very shortly thereafter we can implement it and make it work. And I agree that we should probably do this, prioritizing internal radios in conjunction with the HIP 74 implementation.
Yeah, that was good answer. You answered my questions.
I think this brings up another interesting point, which we don't have to expand on here because it's not really the POC related, but like, I don't know that the foundation should be the one deciding all the sub-DAOs what they do. I think we should, again, offline we can discuss, figure out a way that the mobile sub-DAO decides which mobile hips go up for vote and all that. But again, like, we don't have to expand on that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. So right now we are in kind of in a precarious position because we are right at the cusp of the transition to Solana. So we have, basically some hips being passed using the standard voting versus the, V mobile voting. But yeah, I generally agree. I mean, it's still going to be a foundation that's going to be, I think, doing a lot of the administrative work for the sub-DAOs. I don't think that like the foundation's role goes away, because even for the sub-DAO hips, like, you need to operate the community Discord, you need to make the rooms for people to discuss the hips, even if they're sub-DAO hips. Somebody needs to be pushing the buttons for votings to occur. And I would envision that it would still be the foundation that does this administrative type of work. But there's not going to be like the part that I hear and that I agree with is like there shouldn't be like a dependency on, for example, hips or things related to like the IoT network, for instance. We shouldn't be in like a position where like, oh, let's wait for this voting to happen until whatever, like some IoT hip passes. Okay. So let's talk about the carrier hex boosting. Have you guys did everybody have a chance to review the latest iteration? Or would you like me to take you through the bullet points that I put together?
Is commenting in the document the best place to put comments?
I think so.
Okay, good.
Okay, how about this? I can try and share my screen, and we can go through the comments that are already there. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like there's some formatting changes. So, um, does this also work for misaligned radios? I think that there is a bigger issue in that how do we combat gaming in this type of scenarios where, for instance, a person is, submitted like a CPI request and is lighting up hexes that have been boosted, but really, like, the radio is like in a different location, or they've submitted and they moved it, or something like this, or I don't know, whatever the gaming vectors are. But maybe whoever made the comment, Jason, like, do you want to expand on what the concern is here, or what is the next level issue that you see with the comment?
Sure. Basically, I was just trying to understand exactly what would happen in, like, I guess if you had you spoof the radio and you spoof the phone, or just, I guess actually, if in this scenario, all you would have to do is spoof the phone location, and then you would be able to tell it, oh yeah, your data's flowing here, and it's really not. If you understand, or like, well, I guess in that scenario you could even inside of your proper cover. Okay, yeah, I'm thinking it through as I'm saying it, but so basically, yes. So if somebody set up a radio and they wanted the data to start flowing, they just spoof a phone, put it in their own coverage area. But I don't know how that would be like double. I don't know how you prevent that, because you've got both sources reporting.
I mean, generally speaking, I don't see any personally, but maybe I'm not seeing something like a lot of risk from like phone spoofing here, because the only entity that would be interested in like spoofing the data potentially is a carrier that is concerned with their mobile that's locked into the hexes being lost because they're not meeting the quota, which
Right.
I don't think is like a first order of concern for us, simply because it's going to be just purely from like logistics standpoint a nightmare to be able to do that kind of enforcement. It's not worth the mobile that's locked into the spoofing the data.
Sure.
Because there's going to be a large number of hexes, like they're going to be given that there are REST 12 hexes, there's going to be tens of thousands of them, at least, maybe more, that are going to be boosted to a different degree, and sending people around and having them spoof data usage in certain hexes to not lose mobile. It just doesn't seem to especially for a carrier that's been voted into the sub-DAO, I don't really see that as an issue. There is something worth thinking about when because a certain number of hexes are boosted, the incentive for spoofing or lying about coverage within the boosted locations is probably higher, and that could be an issue. So maybe something for me to, or for us to kind of jointly think about how we minimize that.
Sure. I guess I was going through that. I don't know what. Just trying to understand
Yeah, it was late. It was late.
Just trying to figure out exactly what if there might be something in there, but if I wasn't completely sure. I just want to
I mean, I think one anti-spoofing thing is that it's actually a crime to spoof your location with CBRS with actual.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, it's crime, but I've raised that before in the community and was told that crypto people are not scared of the law. So
That is true.
anyway, yeah. Do you guys understand like what the like? This is a little bit of a maybe like one of the more complex pieces of this hex locking concept, and I tried to draw a picture to explain it. The point is that when you're boosting certain hexes, the idea behind the boosting is not so much to just say like this specific res12 hex is where I expect X amount of data. It's more like approximately marking the area, right? Like it's impossible to tell with 100% accuracy, even with reasonably rich discovery data, that like on this day we will be having this much usage in this particular res12 hex. But what you can do is you can look kind of like an aggregate and say you mark up, I don't know, 50 hexes in a certain location that you say we need coverage in these locations, generally speaking, like around these 50 hexes. But you don't necessarily always like hit exactly like the hexes. So counting like on a per hex basis, whether or not the usage has happened and met the quota is a little bit. It's almost never like possible to get it right. So while the marking and the quota creation happens on a per hex basis, the counting of whether or not the quota has been met happens on the per radio basis, which is really like where which is really kind of the source of the data. Like this is where we're going to be counting whether or not the data is happening. So in a situation where, for example, we marked up like 3 hexes and said that we're boosting these ones right here. Please bring coverage here, and then the radio brought in coverage and lit up these 3 hexes, but also 10 other hexes, and the actual coverage. The actual usage has happened, not in the boosted hexes, but, the ones that are like adjacent or one over, but still belonging to the same coverage, to the same radio, then that usage is going to be counted towards the quota. That's kind of like the point of that bullet and the picture.
I think that's pretty reasonable, especially because we're talking about an area where people are going inside or outside. Like the location precision is going to get a little wonky with someone traversing in and out of a indoor location. So I think that there seems to be reasonable to have a little bit of leeway there.
Okay. Cool.
I do like the illustration, but the main thing I was in larger setups like omnidirectional 436s when it covers quite a large area, is that going to be problematic in terms of like, oh, if it's anywhere near that, is that going to still reach it? Or I guess is it drawing off of the modeled coverage to determine what is possible, or what would be in the same, I'll call it, group?
So I think what we can do is we could boost Res 12s, but then have the data transfer just be Res 6, as long as it happens within a certain area or to those radios that are covering those Res 12s. Like I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's another way kind of doing it. And but like then if it's Res 6, then it's Res 6 around, like, because I would imagine that if we boost, for example, you would boost, I don't know, like 50 hexes in the location that is Res 12, like anywhere between 10 and 50 or something like this would be boosted to mark up the location. Then you would be looking at Res 6 around like the periphery, so anything that is around, or
No,
how do you
don't.
find the rest of it?
Well, now that I think about it, it's just as long as the radios that are covering any of those boosted hexes
Right.
have data transfer,
Yeah.
because I don't think we're going to be as granular about where all the data transfer is actually happening. But we
Right.
know if it goes through a radio that it's probably happening in that area.
Right, exactly. So that's basically that was exactly my logic too. In the beginning, I was like, well, maybe we should do like a Res 6, and then I'm like, well, wait a second, like if the coverage is not there, the data is not going to happen anyway. Like it doesn't matter if it's Res 6 or not. So the only offload can happen in a place where the radio is actually radiating. So why don't we just like look at the per radio coverage basis instead of trying to like draw hexes and make complex diagrams?
Yeah, the other thing I'm thinking about this gaming aspect of it. In practice, and we can change this later if other service providers don't want to use it in this way. In practice, though, Helium Mobile is just going to look at where they're spending the most on T-Mobile coverage, and then incentivize people to put radios in those spots. So we can expect a pretty quick. It may not be like a huge number, but at least some data transfer going on in those areas.
Yep.
So what if we make it where you have to hit some threshold of data transfer right now, as the radio operator, to be eligible to receive those boosted earnings?
Explain this to me again.
So,
I'm not sure I follow. Yep.
so Helium Mobile says, this area in New York City needs more coverage because we're spending a ton of money on T-Mobile in that area. So
Yep.
we mark up on the map here the hexes that will receive more proof of coverage rewards just for existing and providing coverage in those areas. We would assume, since there's already data transfer for the MVNO going on in that area, that once a radio turns on pretty instantaneously or within a couple of days, there will be some amount of data transfer flowing through that radio.
Yes.
What we're afraid of is someone saying that they're in that area, but they're really just spoofing their location. So we have some minimum number of data transfer that has to go through that radio before we can say, okay, we believe that this this
okay,
radio is where it is.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love it. That actually solves a lot of problems around spoofing. That's correct. That's good. Okay. Yeah.
I guess the idea is kind of like the spoofer won't want to spend $10 or $20 or $30 of data just to get the boosted rewards in the area.
Well, and the other thing is, because it's Helium Mobile SIMs that are going around doing the, what do we call it, the coverage mapping or whatever? Discovery mapping. Like, Helium Mobile does KYC on their customers, so they kind of know who people are and where they're located. So if none of those phones ever ping the radio that we know are in those areas, we have a pretty good idea that it may be spoofed. But if people who are always going around in New York City using T-Mobile coverage, we have a really good idea that those people are actually there. And if those people then go and ping that radio, or they do data transfer through that radio, it's pretty safe to assume that there's actually a radio there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of triggering the outsized rewards for the radio, and tying them to some amount of data having passed through the radio. It's very easily trackable, and we can make sure that it's not just like any data, but it's like real subscriber data. So yeah, I think that'll solve a lot of problems. Okay. Any more on this topic before we move lower down?
No, I think that solves that problem.
Using epochs versus months. Yes, I agree. My blockchain tape writing hygiene is not great. in using days and months and epochs interchangeably. So definitely we'll clean it up. So this is an interesting one to discuss. Burning versus, I guess the alternative would be dispersing it to the radio owner, if I'm understanding the comment correctly.
Yeah, I've been going. This was mentioned obviously probably a few weeks ago, and I've been bouncing around with it, kind of wrestling with it. And what are you trying to incentivize? What's the price? What's the cost? Because if somebody goes out and sets up a radio with the promise of more proven rewards, and it doesn't happen, then they're out. They tried to do something and got essentially nothing. So yes, they should get something for. And I just was trying to figure out a way of how that makes sense, because because essentially what ends up happening, I guess the original thought was you're taking a bigger slice of the POC pie and giving it to them because they're providing coverage in that area, but then instead of, that's actually taking POC rewards from the entire ecosystem away. I mean, maybe that'll be a pretty small number, but still, I think statistically significant.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, there is this mechanism that I proposed here, and again, like all these numbers, I'm kind of just gut feel throwing them out there. It's not like there is a deep scientific research behind each one of them. So they are all up for discussion, by the way. But what's proposed is that once the area is boosted with a mobile getting locked in there, first of all, you cannot unboost it for at least 3 months. So you give the community 3 months period to put in the coverage. If 3 months has passed, no coverage is created, okay, maybe whatever, this area is just too hard. You cannot create coverage there for whatever reason, no backhaul or I don't know what. If nothing happens, then the service provider can take the mobile back. But if inside 3 months coverage does appear, then from here on forward, this area is going to be boosted for 6 months. And the POC rewards will remain, like the outsized POC rewards, even if there is no data. The person that has, invested heavily, potentially, I don't know, laid fiber if necessary to put a radio there, they'll get at least 6 months of the POC rewards. It's not entirely out of the question if, in addition to the 6 months of outsized POC rewards, we transfer the locked mobile to them if there is no data. But I don't know if it's going to be super material. And I mean, one of the reasons why I like the burn is because we don't really have a lot of mechanisms right now to decrease the supply of tokens. If I want tokens to be worth something, there needs to be more sort of mechanisms for decreasing the supply. We have the great mechanism for continuously, minting more, and there's more and more mobile out there. And yes, we have this mobile treasury thing where you can convert it, but I don't think it's enough, and I don't know how much mobile is going to get burnt through the treasury mechanism. Frankly, it's unclear. So the more opportunities we can come up with, where obviously it makes sense, where we can counterbalance the minting with some burn, the healthier it would be for the overall tokenomics. Hence,
I think we just have to be careful.
My bias towards a burn.
On what we do burn with. I agree that we should burn it. We just have to be careful because we don't want to burn for things that should be burning HNT, and then have that become a whole issue between the sub-DAOs.
Oh yeah, for sure. But this, I think, here is an explicit example where it's absolutely not something that HNT can or should be used for.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's exactly. So, like, because there is a limited number of applications where we can use mobile and burn mobile. Like, if there was any applications, this is like it, right? It's like this, and maybe a committed coverage, Armin idea, and some burn mechanism tied to that. These are the two, like, most clear opportunities to create some sort of burn mechanism for mobile, from my standpoint. So I'm personally a fan of burn option versus like just redistribute it. I think that redistribute is not going to make hugely material difference, given that they already get 6 months of outsized POC rewards, even if there's no data. So they'll get 6 months of POC rewards that are outsized, plus they'll get the mobile that's locked into the hexes. Okay, well, that's some, but it's not really going to hugely move the needle. And we're not getting the burn. We're just pumping it back out to the different player into the ecosystem. So I would vote for burn, but yeah.
The other question is, what if we just, instead of staking it all, it's just a burn to boost hexes?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe not a horrible idea.
Because if you think about it, if there's a place that you're spending, let's use round numbers, $5 per gig from T-Mobile, if you have to burn mobile tokens to up that to, say, $1 per gig, you still net out to better, even with that burn.
Yeah, and it's simpler, right? You don't need to deal with like quotas and stuff.
Yeah, that actually does simplify a lot of it. And then it doesn't become a gaming vector, because why would you burn to then re-earn? Yeah.
The
What about the
downside is
implied
that
promise? Sorry. What about the implied promise, Max? In the sense of, if it's just burn, where are you still? The POC rewards are still boosted.
Well, so the implied promise, though, is you, if you set up a radio there, you're still getting the boosted rewards. Like, I think that's all you can really count on.
So 6 months of 5x on the POC, which is pretty small.
You can somewhat reasonably assume, though, that they're not just going to burn mobile tokens and then not have any coverage there, or not have any users there once the coverage is there.
That is a fair point, especially if they know they're losing it.
Right.
They're less likely to game us.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea, actually. I mean, like, I'm somewhat emotionally attached to the data quotas and all of the stuff that I've invested some cognitive cycles in, but actually, I do think that just like burn it and boost it is like simple, and then we don't need to worry about any of these like quotas or anything like that. It's just if you know that you need coverage there because it'll save you money on Timo, just burn the mobile there, like, and there you go. And maybe there is some sort of function where we like continuously burn it to keep it boosted, like, right? So like a burn buys you a boost of a certain amount for a certain period of time. And if something has happened and like there is no data there, or you're concerned that maybe your usage is growing in the area, and you're concerned if you stop burning and the usage does not like people will move their radios away somewhere else, then you can just keep burning in that location. So as long as the economics are such that it's more worth it for you to burn it to incentivize radios to stay there, versus what you'd be paying to Timo, then it's just worth to burn it. So yeah, I mean, it's provided like we get the numbers right. I think it could potentially be like a good and very significant simplification.
And then it also kind of allows for dynamic pricing, where if there really is a need for it, like the service providers can pay more if they want to, just through this kind of roundabout way.
Yeah.
What about us as operators gaming the service provider? They boost an area. We all drag our feet, forcing them to boost it some more before we get around to putting something there.
It's game theory. Like, someone's going to do it before you do it.
Right. Someone doesn't mind the smaller rewards because they know that they're getting it. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, then we can just like eliminate 80% of his hip with a simple change. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good.
I wonder if the one number that's probably going to have to... well, there is a negative, and that is that instead of the carriers then just recycling that money to constantly push it more and more towards the right direction, it would just be, I guess, slightly limited. Yeah. But maybe
well, I mean, eventually you'll be. This whole thing is going to be somewhat temporary. I mean, temporary is like, maybe a decade temporary, but the point is that at some point when there is sufficient coverage everywhere and there's a lot of data on the network, you no longer need to be burning things in places to incentivize coverage. Maybe surgically in certain locations, but at some point it becomes less useful. Right? So, and then however much has been burnt out of the supply by that point, that's basically the mobile that's left. And this will significantly, like this will create a lot of utility for mobile. Yeah, no, I mean, I love it. Good idea.
So burn 600 mobile for 6x boost POC rewards. Radio owners will put the radios there, and then they say the boost is for what? 1 month, 30 epic. And then they have to continue burning the same amount every month to keep up the boost, but they can also lower it. Say, lowering it to a 2x boost since they're already data flowing, and then eventually there's no boost because there's enough data, right?
Right, that's right. More or less. I don't know if I can, like, probably will need to play around with the numbers a little bit. But yeah, some, like, the mechanics would be like that, yes.
I think we can even go really simple where we don't even need to do any math. It's if you, let's say you take 1 million mobile and you burn 1 million mobile towards a certain number of hexes, those hexes earn 1 million mobile more. So you're essentially paying people to provide coverage, but you're burning it and then it's being reminted. Or maybe we want to do a multiplier. But I think the simpler way would just be a 1-for-1. Essentially, Helium Mobile paying people to put radios in certain places.
I think that multiplier is better because with multiplier, you also, and that's like you want to not only simply pay people to put radios in places to like by burning mobile. First of all, like I'm not even sure that it's like from a regulatory standpoint that can fly. Like if it's us like basically giving people mobile to put radios, that's
well, you would burn the mobile.
It's not something that is like,
but yes,
right. But it's kind of like it's not gray enough for not to be like it's too direct. Like I feel like like you burn it, but then something else gets just. But more importantly, I think that you don't just want to incentivize certain locations, you also want to disincentivize all the other locations. And this is what the multiplier gets you. Because there's a limited amount of mobile that gets minted for the radios. And you don't want just like the service provider like buying mobile and then effectively like paying it to people in certain locations. You want to also be signaling where you should be, creating coverage. Because we have like some places right now where there's like, I don't know, 15 radios, on one roof, covering more or less the same area that in some instances like nobody needs, right? So I think that the signaling with the multipliers is critical for coverage to be created in places where there's data.
It's a zero-sum game either way, but the only thing, so right now the multiplier is a stronger effect, but as you hit a certain level and maybe there's no need to boost hexes at that point, having a fixed number could have more of an effect.
Okay. Well, let me play around with the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally tied to either way. I'm just throwing out options here because we came up with this new idea of burning like 5 minutes ago.
I want to also add that Helium Mobile is going to be launched in certain cities, and the more you boost, and you're taking away mobile from all the non-boosted hexes as well. So you can't make it too extreme, otherwise you'll have a lot of deployers complaining.
Yeah, it's true, but I think that realistically there is no way around some of the deployers complaining. But ultimately, anything that drives coverage into locations with data, this will benefit the network long term. So tactically speaking, yes, the multiplier will mean less people, like people that have already deployed areas in certain locations will be, if those locations not boosted, will be earning less at the expense of people that are putting radios in a boosted locations. But long term, it will mean that the network actually has value, right? Which means that, the tokens that you've earned will actually be worth something or worth more.
No, I agree with that. I agree with the boosting, but I think we need to keep in mind that, say, a 5x boost to the POC rewards, I think it's a little bit extreme. Maybe a 2 or a 3, I think is plenty enough for deployers to want to put it in that area. In addition, they know that they're getting data. They're going to get paid for data, so that's already in itself an incentive.
Okay, well, I'll play around with the numbers a little bit. I think that we need to kind of like, I don't know if I agree with 2x is enough notion, frankly. I do think that if you are, as a service provider, driving outside rewards for a certain area, that should mean that it should cost you something, meaning you should burn some meaningful amount of mobile. But yeah, let me play around with the numbers a little bit and see how these things pan out.
Yeah, I guess the main thing that I could probably side with Brainstormer is how much of, I guess, control will, at least for the short term, Helium Mobile have control over who gets POC rewards. Because if they can dramatically affect everything, then, because I would say the general goal is to have Helium Mobile everywhere. I think everybody that's the end goal. But we don't want to be too short-sighted with just boosting places that, or I would say almost over-boosting places that, at the end of the day are just, depending on which cities, are kind of arbitrary. Like if you choose Houston over Dallas, or, set of cities, Miami over Tampa, like those are just kind of arbitrary choices. Maybe they're the best choices, sure, but they're you're going to be in Tampa, or you're going to be in all these cities at some point. Why? I guess I'm trying to think why would you want to have? I just don't want there to be too much focus or too much control of the POC by this function.
Well, so a lot of the MVNOs are regional, for one, and the other is you want to incentivize what your customer wants on both levels. So if there are a lot of people in Tampa and not any people in Miami using Helium Mobile, you want to make sure that the people in Tampa have the coverage. And then at the second level, if Helium Mobile is going to be using a lot of data in Tampa, the Helium network wants to make sure that the coverage is there for that customer. So it's just dictated by the customers, where they are and what they want.
Yeah, that is correct. And another thing that's important to keep in mind is that with this, with the CBRS and eventually also Wi-Fi network, there is not the possibility to create ubiquitous coverage. Like, it's not like we can blanket all of the US ever. It's just not going to happen. So what we can do, though, is blanket 20% or 10%, but those be the 10% where 90% of the data usage is happening. Because of that, and this 10% that where the radios are, it's not just any usage, it's really tied to the usage for the service providers that are using the network, which to the previous comment, like some MVNOs are regional, right? Some MVNOs focus on, like GigSky, for instance, like they focus specifically on like particular areas of interest, like parks and like different like recreation centers, etc., places where tourists tend to congregate. And there's different permutations of those. So enabling, I think, the pool of the carriers that is using the network to very precisely and meaningfully influence the locations that get rewarded is essential to getting a lot of data onto the network. I mean, granted, you don't want to do it such that, like, basically everybody who's already invested significant amounts of money and created coverage in places that, based on like somewhat loose guidance that's been given around lots of slow-moving people, which is not an accurate guidance, but loose nonetheless. Like, obviously, these people should still be earning things. Like, it's not like just forget about just these few areas. But I think that having outsized rewards for certain areas that guarantee data is critical for us to get the flywheel going.
Sure, I'll have to play with the map and kind of come up to a more reasoned position then.
Well, so I'm thinking that if down the road, if we find that this is creating some unforeseen consequence where it's just making everything untenable potentially, there could always maybe be some tweaking where not to make it overly complicated. I wouldn't do this as part of the first iteration of this HIP, but if you have an area that has a sustained amount of data transfer once it's been kind of seeded or boosted, maybe subsequent boosts have less and less effect based on some data transfer threshold. Again, not something that I would suggest trying to work through on this version, because I think the point that many of you both making is like getting this going really fast, really quickly. It really should be the most important thing, because that serves as a model for others to come in as carriers, and those are the carriers that may serve the regions that other builders are building in.
Yep. Okay, well, I think a ton of useful feedback on V2, so let me try and produce a V3 now, ahead of the next call. Play around with the numbers a little bit and see if we can eliminate the data quota complexity and just have a setup where we like burn mobile to create coverage on relevant locations. And then hopefully we'll be close to home next week. In the 6 minutes that we have left, let's do a quick check-in on the Oracle hex boosting and the committed coverage discussion. So I think Gateholder, you were the one that wanted to evolve the Oracle hex boosting to the next level. I'm just curious if you were able to make any progress on it, or if you need help.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying. I kind of done a preliminary outline of kind of how I've been looking at it. I did post it in the mobile POC group, and I like basic. I mean, I was trying to come up with some out there ideas about how to make, or at least what data sets we could pull from. And one of the biggest problems, I don't know if you've had this issue for us into this, because a lot of like I was basically just trying to find a US scalable population heat map, and at least as far as I could find, I couldn't find very high res ones. So lots of them are pretty low resolution in terms of like how accurate they might. And I think I posted a picture in there of the best one I could find, but still like probably the size is like hundreds of square mile. Like each pixel is probably representing probably like a somewhere between 20 and 50 res 12 squares in it. So I don't know how accurate it necessarily needs to be to accurately account for like population, but that's one. The second one is more of a zoning one. And again, there's lots of different. That one has a little more concrete sourcing material involved with it. I personally liked the Google representations, but I noticed that there some of them are they get a little wonky in certain, like if you just kind of peruse certain areas, you notice that it's not like, oh, well, that's a mall and that's not labeled that way. So it's like there's obvious glaring issues that are going to be mislabeled based on any data set we take. And that's, I guess, the general sense that I get from any of these oracles that we create is that they're going to be inaccurate to some degree. And that's I think that's kind of why I like the idea of having at least two, and probably look. And I even was trying to tinker with coming up with a third one, which actually goes into our mappers discussion, which is I think that it makes a lot of sense for us to construct an oracle from the data of our mappers and from discoveries from cell phones. And although that might be a little more complicated, I think that it would actually, in there I have a graph of where I'm like, well, if we weight these three things, we start off with the mapping portion being basically 0 to begin with, but growing to become a significant portion of the total oracle boosting power, then we should be able to get to a good consensus about where good places are based on using our own data and not having to count on the somewhat flawed data types.
Yeah. Okay. I missed the stuff that you posted on the mobile POC channel, but I think that some of the folks at Nova were also digging for different sources, so we'll probably can share what we've been looking at. I think that we can just pick one for starters. We don't need to like complicate things with a lot of different ones and being super precise, because any one would be better than none. And then we can see if we want to like add additional complexity with additional sources of data. So I'll try to kind of resurrect the sources that we were looking at, and then we can decide like what is the first source that we will use for it.
Can we just overlay the like the three MNO maps that they have, and then anywhere that all three don't have coverage, we just make that a 0. Everywhere else is a 1, and that just be our easy solution.
So everywhere we don't have coverage is a 0, is what you're saying? And
Everywhere
we
that
do it.
none of the everywhere that none of the three MNOs have coverage, we can assume it's probably really low value if none of them have coverage there. And if we want to revisit later, we can always change it. But like as a quick and dirty, let's ship something. If no MNO has coverage there from the published maps that they send to the FCC every year, we can probably assume there's no value to putting radios there and make it a 0. Everything else a 1, and then we can tinker from there.
Yeah, actually, that's a great idea.
With that, we have one member in the community that owns a campground, and he has no coverage there, and he's providing coverage to the visitors to his campground. So in your scenario, then he would not get paid.
Well, it's not going to be 100% precise. No source is going to be 100% precise. But I think, and we're not talking about like not get paid or get paid. We can make it maybe like a little bit more granular than that. I don't know, but I do like the idea of using the MNO map. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I looked at their data sets too. And although it does kind of tell you certain things, the one thing that's not going to tell you is, this kind of goes into my whole thesis of mobile, is that I think we're operating on about a 5-to-1 cost to performance ratio over them. So it will make sense for us. I think a large chunk of what they don't cover doesn't make sense, but probably somewhere between 10, 25, maybe even up to 30%. There will be those edge cases where mobile will be like the best, basically the best thing that happened to them in terms of being able to have actual data transmissibility in those areas, like, you know, valleys with relatively low permission, especially because a lot of them are operating on macro scales. It doesn't make sense to try to cover a valley of 100 people if you have to build a tower on one of 2 hills and that are somewhat ideal for a macro site. But I think in the end, the main goal, the main focus is to try to incentivize people to places where it has more. I think, and even though that you could, multiple ways you could try to even attack that, where you could try to have overlay each map as separately. I've looked at doing that. But again, it's just there's I just don't think it doesn't create the right incentive structure ultimately is the problem.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour, so I think we should wrap up. I will produce the next iteration of the hex boosting HIP. We'll do sort of an internal audit of different sources. I do like the idea, and I think it's sensible to have the, like, you know, the 3 big carriers and see if we can use their data. Granted, we look at it with in some nuanced way, maybe, because it's not perfect. And I guess another piece of homework for me is to hunt down Armin on the committed coverage HIP and start making progress there as well. So I propose we close the meeting now then and reconnect next Thursday. And I'll work on my homework.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
I'm gonna outlast Max.
Hold on, I'm replying to a message. You know what? I'm just gonna hang up.
All right, Brainstormer, you can be last.